everybody. Donna Schwartz here from the Everything Saxophone Podcast. I am here with Bennett Wood. So we just met. He's got a new album out called Space and Time, and it comes from a very interesting source of inspiration that is really exciting to me, actually, because I'm a sports buff. I'm a sports fan. But thank you so much, Bennett, for being on the podcast. We're so happy to have you.
It's such an honor to be asked to speak with you today, and I'm really looking forward to having a chance to talk.
Cool. Yeah, listen, you sound great on this album. On the audio portion of this podcast, just to let my video viewers know, I like to share the artists' songs from their latest projects. So you're going to be hearing one of the selections from his album, in the very beginning, and then at the very end, when we're done, I also share another selection. So I'm kind of piquing the interest, everybody. Definitely check that out for sure. You're going to like what you hear. So let me ask you this question, Bennett, so people can get to know you. I'm even curious about this too, because I didn't see it in any of the bios and stuff like that. I want to know about your background. Was saxophone your first instrument or not? And how did you get started? Who were your main influences, all that kind of thing?
Yeah, I think my first instrument was a record player.
It's awesome.
When I think about like my earliest memories of music are putting records on and, dancing in the living room. And it didn't make me a better dancer, but I did it anyway. I guess it made me fall in love with music, And so for me, it started with listening. And like I think a lot of folks, my parents placed a value on being able to play the piano. We had a piano in the house. So like a lot of, I think, well-meaning folks, they signed me up for piano lessons at age 5 or 6.
Okay.
And I did not enjoy that. I did it kind of begrudgingly, but I think that my real interest was more so in just making stuff up on the instrument. And so I had a real hard time with these method books and the things that I think were more common to I think piano has, in terms of the pedagogy of beginning piano, has come a long way from when I was a kid. But what I got was a method book, and if the method book wasn't interesting, then that was kind of, sorry, kid. And so, I got to like middle school age, and my folks said, well, if you take up another instrument, you can stop taking piano lessons.
Okay.
Yes. So, but it came with a catch, because I knew I wanted to play saxophone. My older sister was in the jazz band at the high school, and so I got to hear their concerts. I was like, oh, this is amazing. I distinctly remember Mike Brothers, who was the lead alto player with the Hannibal High School band where I grew up. He played a cut from the Phil Woods record that's in tribute. Each of the tracks is in tribute to a musician. So it was a big band album. The track is Julian, of course, in tribute to Cannonball Adderley. And so he played, I think part of the solo that he played was basically a transcription of what Phil Woods had played. And I remember hearing that and being floored by it. And so, okay, I knew I wanted to play saxophone. Little did I know, it was kind of in the family already. My grandfather had actually paid his way through his undergrad degree playing dance jobs with a territory band in central Missouri. And then he was sent off to World War II. And the way that he told the story, he survived the war because he played music, because he was held back from the front line to play in the officers needed a dance band.
Wow.
And so he organized the dance band. And so long story long, he had an alto and a tenor. And so my sister picked up the alto, but these were around. And so it seemed very accessible to me. I wanted to play saxophone. 6th grade, you had to start on clarinet. And I think this was, again, maybe more common when I was coming up than it is today, but you had to start on clarinet. And so I started on clarinet, and within a year was playing clarinet and saxophone. Again, listening was such a big part of it, because I remember picking up that clarinet. My grandfather took me to pick up clarinet at Mel Bay stores. Like everybody's read the Mel Bay books. Well, there was a Mel Bay store in St. Louis.
Wow.
So my first clarinet came from there. I put it together in the car and he's driving and I'm like, okay, I had piano background. So I knew what the notes of the C major scale were. So I'm like, okay, well, what's the fingering for D? Oh, okay, cool. Got that sound. What's the finger? So I had, with my grandfather's coaching, learned a couple major scales in the drive from the music store back to his house. It was hilarious. In retrospect, it's very funny. And then ultimately, found my way to saxophone by about 7th grade. So
that is okay. I have to say something. That's an awesome story. And I used to teach elementary for a long time back in New York, where I'm initially from. And I would say to the students, okay, do not put your instrument together until I show you how to do it. and don't take this is Carmex, but don't take the cork grease. It's not lip balm. Don't do it. And invariably somebody did that. And now,
right.
Yes, no, you put it together. But the cool thing, you had someone to guide you to do that. But that's funny that you did it on the car ride home. That's awesome.
I couldn't wait, and so, yeah, I didn't think about it, I guess, at the time, but looking back, it's like, man, I was so eager to do that thing. And which is funny because, like, as I say, like, piano, I really didn't have fun. I mean, I did at times, but it wasn't something where I felt a passion for, sitting down to practice the piano. And when I started playing clarinet, that grabbed hold pretty quick. And then when I started playing saxophone and then being around, peer musicians, but also that opened up a whole world of opportunity to be around adult musicians who were playing and gigging. And that was really exciting to me as a young person.
And it was in your, and it's so interesting. It's in your blood. I mean, it's just so interesting. And the funny two things with the piano lessons, it's actually not that piano lessons are bad. It's just that for a lot of people, the experience that they have is one where they're tied to a lesson book. They're tied to a method that, when you're a very young kid, you want to be able to explore a little bit. And a lot of teachers don't allow their students to do that. And that's so unfortunate because it turns off so many people from playing the piano, where not that they'd be a professional on the piano, but, they may have wanted to have continued on the piano in addition to other instruments. So it still happens. And, I know that because when I've spoken to so many people, and people that are younger too, it still happens. But the cool thing also is that, you want to play saxophone, you play clarinet, that you didn't let that get you down. You were still eager to play it. And that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. I recognize when I work with students that I was an outlier. Like, there were some barriers set up. Like, well, you got to learn to play clarinet before you get to play saxophone. You got to do this before you do that. And I don't know, for whatever reason, like it grabbed me and I was like, okay, I got to learn clarinet. And I played clarinet. I didn't give it up after I started playing saxophone, actually. I mean, I played clarinet through, was a double major in clarinet performance and jazz studies, like halfway through my undergrad before my jazz studies faculty were like, you probably need to pick. And they knew I had already decided. I was basically recycling things that I had worked up on clarinet in high school in my undergrad clarinet lessons, and I was like, yeah, I should probably just get out of that lane and do the jazz thing full time. So
yeah, but the cool thing though is that when you go on gigs and you do need to double, especially if you're in a big band.
It's beautiful. Set. It's beautiful, and every time I'm reminded how much I've forgotten. It's that instrument is a totally different animal, and so when I hear contemporary great clarinetists like Annette Cohen, I'm like, oh my God, how do you do that? It's crazy.
Well, let me ask you this question, and this is what my own observations, but again, this is just my experience. Do you feel that starting on the clarinet and even continuing to play it, that helped your technique on the saxophone?
Um, yes, in some ways, I think it really helped. I think, I mean, I have students, I have, of course, there are peers in the scene. We can listen to folks who have like really prodigious technique, really formidable technique, and I don't count myself in that in that category, but I think it does make a difference just in terms of like it, because it's an open hole instrument. It's so finicky
Yeah,
with finger position,
that's true.
and I think that kind of finicky element uh, can make you be a little bit more refined with your movements on saxophone.
Mm.
I did have to kind of retrain myself because with an open hole, your finger acts as the pad, whereas on saxophone, like you want to. I feel like I play best when I keep my fingers on the keys, and I look to the folks that I really enjoy their playing, or I think their technique is really fluid. The old videos of Charlie Parker or somebody like a Ralph Bowen, and man, their fingers hardly move.
Yeah.
They're just right there on the keys, and so it's a mixed bag. I mean, I think that in some ways it's great because you have to be so much more refined with your movements. But then I did feel like I had to kind of retrain myself to, okay, I got to keep my fingers on the keys.
I didn't, that's so funny. I didn't even think about that. Because I'm thinking, yeah, it's open hole, but that's right. Your fingers have to be above the holes. They can't be too far away or too close.
Sure.
And, in the saxophone, one of my mentors always said, rest or press. They
Uh-huh.
rest or they press. And, of
Yeah.
course, we don't always do that, but, just thinking about watching some people play, like Mark Hartsuch, for example. So like he's a modern player right now, and man, he's got blazing technique, and I'm like, he's resting and pressing. I could definitely see that
Yeah.
for sure. But I'm curious too, though, your approach with embouchure for clarinet versus saxophone, did that hold you back? Did it help?
Um, Man, that's a hard one. I feel like my my sound on clarinet, even as I play less, has gotten better because I appreciate better the differences between the embouchures.
Got it.
And I'm also kind of I think for somebody who, I went through 3 degrees in jazz performance, and I never took a classical saxophone lesson from undergrad through grad school through DMA.
Oh, okay.
And so I as a result have had to seek out folks who are experts on classical saxophone, and okay, so what do I need to do differently? And the kind of consensus opinion I've gotten from those folks is, yeah, you got to treat this like a different instrument. And so I go, oh, it's like clarinet. It's a different instrument. Now, not saying that those are the same, but it's like a third. If your trifecta is jazz saxophone, classical saxophone, clarinet, you learn to appreciate the differences between the three. And I'm sure that it did hold me back in some ways, but the other thing that I see with less experienced students that are like high school age, I see a lot of that. I'm speaking of folks that are studying with me to learn to play with the jazz sound. I see a lot of lip really rolled over the teeth really far and super tight, and I think that that's a result of you're going to see how grody my mouthpiece is now. I'm sorry.
It's all good.
Apologies to everyone on the podcast, but like the vibration of the reed, you're not going to be able to see this very well, but we're closing this distance. And
Yes.
the way I think about it is like a lot of times there are too many saxophones in the wind ensemble or whatever the ensemble is, the concert band. Too many saxophones anyway, so they get a lot of saxophones, less saxophones, play quieter. And so they're trying to figure out how to accommodate that. And they use less air. And so then the embouchure knows what to do. It's like, well, we got to get this sound, and we're not going to vibrate the reed with less air. So let's just close the distance. And that's what they do. So we end up with an embouchure that's too tight and slower moving air. And so that's where those pitch issues, a lot of the pitch issues come from for high school age, like less experienced saxophonists. I think it's coming from the fact that they've been unwittingly coached into using bad air
Yeah, that's so
or
interesting.
an unsupported sound, you know?
This is so interesting, this aspect of that, because um,
So I
just
missed that because I didn't play saxophone in those ensembles. I played clarinet, which is always like, no, more clarinets. You know, we need you to blow more air.
yeah, yeah. Okay, this is so interesting because one of my early experiences of playing the saxophone, I was in a wind ensemble, and I was with the other people in the section. I was playing alto, and they would be playing, and like half the time they would have their left hand. This is crazy, right? But they would be taking the left
Oh,
hand and moving the mouthpiece back and forth on the cork, and I'm thinking,
no.
what the hell are you doing? And 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 it took me a while to realize that they thought the mouthpiece placement on the cork was the only way to be in tune. That's the first
Right.
thing. And that
It's a
their
tuning slide,
intonation,
right?
it's a tuning slide, yeah, yeah, like my trumpet, right? And and they're doing this, and like after every passage, change it. After every and I'm thinking, what are you doing? That's not the right way to play, you know? And it really struck me. I stopped playing in that band because it really bothered me, and it took me a while to realize why they were doing that, you know. And
My
that's just
gosh.
a fundamental thing of, you know, fixing intonation, and it really it's the embouchure too. A lot of people, and I did this for a little while too, where you tend to roll over your bottom lip a little too much,
Mm-hmm.
like
Mm-hmm.
that,
Yeah.
you know. And again, just to explain it for audio, like where you could just see the white underneath your lip, and when you do that, you're not utilizing your chin muscles properly. You're stretching them out,
Hello.
you know, and so you're negating half of your face, let's say half of your embouchure right
Exactly.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that you know laryngeal flexibility. You know, there's our nerd word of the day. But like that is, I do think that for me, once I kind of discovered, oh, okay, I need to work on these muscles, and play with there's a it's a I don't know, probably 20-year-old video floating around on YouTube with Jerry Bergonzi doing like a promotion for Rico Reeds, and he talks about the no embouchure.
Yes, okay.
And I love this analogy, but he says that the shape of the embouchure, and he's speaking for jazz, but the shape of the embouchure should be the same as if you're blowing out the candles on a birthday cake. So, you know, for those on audio only, I'm holding up my finger, my index finger, as if it's a candle that's on fire, and then, you know, just this shape. And so he thinks of it that way. And when I started kind of playing around with that, I felt like that opened up my sound a lot. And it's a simple concept. If you've been playing, you know, 5,000 hours with that really rolled over embouchure that's too tight, and as you say, kind of cutting off half of the flexibility of the embouchure, then it takes some time to unlearn those habits.
Yeah.
But and it takes like an incredible amount of diligence, because every time you put the horn to your face, you've got to have it in mind. You've got to be thinking about, okay, stay relaxed, round embouchure. It's hard. It's hard to make those changes. But I think every saxophonist goes through it at some point. And, you know, like I say, I didn't have the heavy classical background that I feel like a lot of folks that go through a couple degree programs get. But you still have hurdles you have to overcome, and in order to find your sound.
Oh, there's no question about that. And let me just ask something for a second too. And again, knowing that you didn't ever have like a classical saxophone lesson, but do you find do you feel that the embouchure is totally different, classical versus jazz for saxophone?
Oh yeah, and to clarify, I mean, I've taken classical saxophone lessons. I didn't study it and perform juries on classical rep. You know, I very much, you know, I'm trying to make up lost ground in a way, because I think that literature can be really beneficial, and I find a lot of it interesting and enjoyable to listen to, and fun to play. It's challenging, but it's just not. Yeah, it's not really something where I studied it formally. But so in my experience, yeah, they're completely different. I mean, of course, I'm playing a different setup for classical. I feel like everything about the way that I blow the horn is different. The embouchure, the air is different. I'm thinking about the saxophone completely differently. And I mean, it helps for me. I primarily gig on tenor, but if I switch, man, that's a hard switch to go from alto mouthpiece to like jazz mouthpiece to classical setup, because I feel like it's so much more than just the embouchure. It's even the way I blow the horn changes.
Wow, okay, that's interesting. And everybody's got their own thing with this. Some people feel that it's not that much of a change except for equipment that they're using and
Sure.
whatnot. But my thing is whatever works, works. That's the most important thing. But are you, because you're director of jazz studies, so you're
I
you're
am, yeah.
focusing just on jazz at Webster
Hmm.
University.
Yes.
You're not necessarily dealing with classical students, so you're pretty much just doing the jazz all the time now.
Yeah, not at all. Now, I had the privilege of one semester working, kind of covering some overload with Dr. Michael Schultz at University of Memphis. And he is one of the best I know in terms of being able to really play classical saxophone at ultra high level and then turn around and, just blow the doors down on the jazz side of the horn too. And so he's been a great resource for me in terms. I can reach out to him and say, "Hey, I'm having an issue with this," and he'll say, "Yeah, well, because you need to do this fingering, or So he's offered some great insights on this, but I'm definitely not the guy to tell folks this is what you should do for classical, but I tend to kind of try and seek out experts on these things and follow their directives. And I'm lucky to have a lot of great classical saxophonists in my life between folks like Michael and Todd Oxford at Texas State University. And so it's fun to be around folks that really understand that literature and how to play the instrument that way, because it's so different.
Yeah, for sure. And what's really interesting too, I'm going to bring this back to the beginning where you were playing piano, age 5, but it was
Hmm.
kind of a drudgery because you're playing out of a method book and you just really wanted to make stuff up, right?
Yeah.
When you played clarinet, it's like this is a different sound. And that automatically it's like, yeah, that's going to inspire that. But I'm going to go back to the make stuff up thing. And I think that that's probably an inherent part of you that, that needs to be fulfilled as compared to, going the classical route probably would have not made you become a professional musician or even a teacher in a sense. I'm only saying that I'm assuming, but I'm saying that based on that early experience because, it could be very stifling. It could be very stifling.
Yeah, absolutely. Something you were saying earlier about the piano learning out of method books, etc. I mean, I think that sometimes we can forget to deal with the joy of making music.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people that where they have really strict teachers. Look, I'm not anti-method book. Let me just say that. I think
No,
method books are
they're
great.
great tools.
Yeah, for sure. But the other thing too is that it's knowing your student and getting to know your student. If you're finding that they're really not into something, it's changing gears and saying, you know what, let's just have a little fun, let's experiment a little bit, and then get them to, experiment in the within the lesson that maybe in the method book so that they have that understanding that excuse me that curiosity, and then when you put the music in front of them be like, oh, okay, and then they're more into it. You know what I mean? I don't think
Yeah.
for many teachers, it's not just piano too, but I think for many teachers they're just not comfortable doing that.
Yeah, I mean it's hard work.
Yeah.
It's a more thoughtful process to think about from the student's perspective. Well, what are the things that make them excited about playing this instrument, or what are the things that excite them about music? And I think part of the thing for me that made clarinet instantly more appealing was that along with getting the clarinet, I think within a week, no, it wasn't even a week. it was probably the same day, my grandfather handing me an Artie Shaw record and a Benny Goodman record.
Oh, wow.
And so it was like, oh, cool. Okay, so this instrument can do these things. And I think, especially for beginners, sometimes it can get lost along the way. Like, hey, this instrument is capable of making all these sounds, and that is really the magic of music. I think about for non-musicians who come and hear music, like we're music nerds. So we may go listen to a show and really enjoy someone's harmonic substitutions. It's like, great, cool. But for folks who don't know anything about music, they may just hear that as tension and release, or they may not. It may kind of go over their heads.
Yeah.
But there's a magic in seeing somebody step on stage and seemingly pull music out of thin air. And so I try to be cognizant of that when I think with beginners or even more advanced students. Like, it's important to remember that part of what makes this stuff appealing and interesting to listen to is that magic. And if they get away from that, it can become more of a drudgery. And so I think it's fun with students to, I think the method books are great when they're utilized in the right way, but you've also, sometimes it's, hey, check this Hank Crawford recording out. Isn't this cool? And oh, they love that. They're like totally into a thing. And then kind of break it down and say, okay, well, he's doing this. Now in the method book, that's your A major scale, So let's get that together, and then let's do, so these two things can work in concert, where we can connect the things that they hear on record with the method.
Absolutely. And, I love the way you said this too, because the thing is that one of the reasons why people take up an instrument is they want to play it, they want to play songs, they want to make up things or whatever. And look, I taught public schools for a long time, over 15 years. And I saw, I used different teaching methods. So I would use ears before eyes. And so I was doing stuff differently than other people. And only because I wasn't taught that way. I wasn't. I went to a class at the University of Hart School of Music for summer, and it's taught by Chris Azera, and it was building creativity in music. So I'm music learning theory certified here, and that changed my life, and it changed the lives of my students because I was taught method books. I was taught to read and play at the same time, and that's overwhelming. I don't care what age you are, if you're 65 or if you're 5, it's overwhelming. Where get to know the instrument, but also get to know, get the ears going, because it's an aural, A-U-R-A-L, it's an aural thing that we're doing. We're not reading a radio, and I'm using an old term, radio, but, get the ears involved, get the excitement involved, and the possibilities involved. Because the thing is that, it's not like you're not going to get excited about classical music. No, I mean, I still love listening to Phil Smith, in the early days, principal trumpet of the New York Philharmonic, listening to those recordings, listen to Håkan Hardenberger, all the trumpet people that I studied. And then the Freddie Hubbards, the Clifford Browns, I could never get enough of. I could never get enough of Chet Baker, even though he didn't have the greatest sound, but there's something about him, there's something about his vocal. I don't know what it is, but it's these types of things that shape people and that also build the appreciation in music, where they don't have to be professional musicians, but if we could build that appreciation, we're going to have more people going to shows, going to concerts, and not pulling the phone out, and not yelling and, during a performance and appreciating it and stuff like that. I just think that, there's a lot more involved, and I understand a lot of people get into teaching for the security. I'm talking private teaching and stuff like that. The security, I totally get it, but I just feel like you're dealing with another human being, and there's so much of an impact you can have with them.
Oh, say that again, because I work with high school students who are planning to pursue music as a career. I work with college students who are in the process of pursuing that career here at Webster University. And I have a lot of high school students who are thinking about a career in music, and they talk to me about music ed as a backup.
Yeah.
And I always say, okay, well, let's press pause on that for a second. So you're pursuing that as a backup because the thought is that you might not make it in performance. Okay. If you don't make it in performance, you'll find something else to do, and there's no harm done. If you try to make a career in education and it goes badly, who's harmed by that?
Wow.
Children. Let's not harm children.
Yes.
And generally they go, oh, yeah, I shouldn't do that. Like if teaching is not your passion, you should find something else to do. But I mean, I think that it also drives home the point that, like, man, I don't know of a single internationally touring artist who doesn't do some form of educational outreach as a part of their work.
That's true. Yeah.
And so I think it's so important for folks at every level to be thinking about pedagogy and connecting with students where they are, because a lot of times we can deal with really abstract, esoteric stuff, but it's important to be able to connect with a room full of, second and third graders too. And again, share just the joy of making music with those folks. I'm based here in St. Louis, Missouri. We're lucky to have Jazz St. Louis, which is the third largest nonprofit for jazz in the United States. And they have a program where they bring in like 150 students at a time for each of the subscription series. They've got internationally touring artists that come through town, and they're here for a week. And so on a Friday afternoon, they'll do a lunchtime concert with 150 kids. And that is one of the coolest things that I've gotten to witness. I remember this was a couple years ago with Cecile McLaurin-Salvant and Sullivan Fortner, two folks that are like absolutely at the top of their game. I think in terms of jazz, like they are amazing musicians, regardless of genre. But man, they did the coolest little hour-long workshop with these students, and those kids were so into what was happening on stage. I love that kind of stuff, that connecting, the joy of making music, whether folks are musicians or not. I think that there's something that is innately human about making music that everyone can connect with.
Yeah, and that's right. You reminded me of that. I forgot about that, and that's such a great program. I've had a couple of guests on that have spoken about that. But what you're also making me think of too, like some of my other previous guests, like Derek Brown, who has gone to schools, and usually like maybe high school kid age or college kid age kids or whatever. Alexa
Right.
Tarantino, Camille Thurman.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're just going around. There's plenty more, of course, but just going around to these schools. I know Bob Reynolds has done it as well. And it's that kind of interaction with those kids where, some of them are not going to be professional players, but sometimes that interaction makes a kid want to be a professional player and want to pursue music. And let me also backtrack to something else you said too, which is so great and so important. This whole idea of using music ed as a backup, that has been around for like a half a century, and when I was growing up, it was the idea, those who can't teach.
Mm-hmm.
And I internalized that, and that wasn't a good thing, because I could have gotten involved in education a lot sooner than what I did. But
Mm-hmm.
it's such a harmful way of thinking in many ways for the person that's the teacher, but also, like you said, people don't think about this. It's for the kids too, because kids,
Yeah.
they're so more aware and astute of, like, if you're having a problem, if you're in a bad day, a young kid's going to know that even before you say anything. because
Yeah.
they're more sensory. They're more sensory developed in that way. We beat it out of them in school. We really do, so
Yeah.
that they could be adults and they could function in society. But the thing though is that, the importance of education and and also for, like these artists going around and inspiring people. The other thing also that people are not exposed to is this. There are so many music industry jobs out there that musicians are in. I keep thinking about, you're not too well, no, you're closer than I am, but like sweetwater.com, right? Incredible
Hmm.
company. All the people that work there, you know um, are musicians, and they have such incredible customer service, right? That's a type of industry job. All these industry jobs where people are helping people with products. I think of all the people I see at the NAMM show every year, like Jody Espina from Jody Jazz, right? The
Right.
Theo Wane, the Matt Ambrose, and those people from Theo Wane. I'm thinking about Melvin Lord from Victory Musical Instruments, the stuff that he's done. He's an engineer, and he created these saxophones that, thinking from an engineer's perspective, and a horn player also, he's a saxophone player as well, the stuff that he's done that blows my mind. And all these companies that need people that are so excited about music, but maybe performing full time is not their thing. There's so many opportunities for students. I'm wondering, I know you're the director of jazz studies. I'm just curious though, like in your university or whatever, are there opportunities for students to learn about these other types of opportunities that can be available to them if they're not doing the teaching or the performing?
Yeah. So we one of the things that I think is really cool about Webster is there is a lot of flexibility in terms of different tracks that folks can take. And so, for example, for students that are going to go the music education route, jazz combo is a major ensemble.
Oh, good.
Now, a lot of schools like, no, it's got to be the wind symphony, or it's got to be the orchestra, or you can sing in a choral ensemble or something like that. No, but you can be jazz singers. That's a major ensemble. Jazz combo, major ensemble. Jazz collective, which is our large jazz group, major ensemble. And I think that that added flexibility for those music ed students is great, because then they're getting that boots on the ground experience of addressing the music, especially in a combo setting. They're learning tunes by ear.
Yes.
So it's an oral connection with music, which I think about the great classical musicians that I've had the opportunity to hear and meet and interact with, and all of them listen extensively, to
Yeah.
not only their own instrument, but to other instruments, to other genres. And so listening, it's like, in order to play jazz, we have to deal with it in an oral context, right? But in order to play classical music effectively, you have to do the same thing. And I
Yes.
think sometimes that is like a skipped step along the way. I don't kind of jumping back to something that we were talking earlier, but back to Webster. I mean, we also have a degree in songwriting, so that would give folks the opportunity. We have students who are writing like really incredible material that's original, and they also participate in jazz singers, that they participate in combos. And they're writing original music for different ensembles on campus.
That's good.
So there are really great opportunities. And I think the other thing that's wonderful about this university is we're in the city of St. Louis. So you're within striking distance of the St. Louis Symphony, Jazz St. Louis, the St. Louis Art Museum, which is free. Like all of these incredible cultural, the Pulitzer Museum, which is like one of my favorite kind of small art museums here regionally. All of these things are accessible to students. And most of them are either free or very, very steeply discounted.
Oh, that's good.
So they have an opportunity to engage in the scene and engage with the culture of the city. And I think that's such an important thing as folks are going through a degree program and, finding their way as artists, as teachers, that they're well-rounded, and that they're getting an opportunity to engage with folks not only in their university, because that can become very siloed. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I have ways that I think about music, and I have a set of priorities in terms of what I think is important musically, but that's not the only way. And I encourage my students to, go out and listen to music, hear what other people have to say about what are their priorities musically, and then they're going to find their own path through all of that. I mean, it's a searching, like it's a process, but I think that access to a scene, and to folks who are really playing and teaching on a high level outside the university is really important.
Yeah, I was gonna also say too, like, the jazz scene there. First of all, the history of St. Louis, right? But jazz wise, but also, there's a scene there, right? There's a jazz scene, so
Absolutely.
that's incredibly
Absolutely.
important.
Yeah, I mean, on a Wednesday night, folks can go by the dark room, and there's a jam session that's led there by Bob DeBoo from Open Studio. And Adam Manis is playing around town all the time. Peter Martin lives here in town. He's around. Dave Weckl is in town. So there are all these folks that one of my mentors and teachers, Reggie Thomas, just retired from Northern Illinois University, and he's now back in St. Louis. So folks have access, if they make the time, to go out and be involved in the scene, to hear all of these musicians play. And I think that's as important, as in a lot of cases as the study that we do in the classroom.
Yeah, and I'm also curious about something too. You mentioned, and this is great, that jazz combos are a major ensemble. For the longest time, I mean, I know many schools it's not. I'm curious, do your music ed students, one of the big things with music ed is that, you have to learn a whole bunch of things. You've got to learn how to teach, but you also have to be competent in all the instruments as well, based on, where you want to teach. But the one thing that's always missing is the jazz education, in terms of, a lot of these directors will get a high school band job that includes leading a jazz ensemble. And if they don't have the experience of even playing in a combo group or whatever, it's scary. It's a scary thing. And then what happens is, they take that job, they do the best that they can. They teach blues scales,
Right.
and because that's what they're told to do, because it's, they were told it's easy, that keeps getting perpetuated and all that kind of thing. But, are there opportunities, like, for the students in your university to get some kind of jazz education that can help them, if they're in that kind of situation as a music teacher, to be a band director, to be a jazz band director? Yeah.
Well, as I'm sure you're aware, I mean, a music ed degree is generally just jam-packed from start to finish. And there's so much information that the students need to learn and fit in, which makes sense. But I think at the same time, a lot of times there's some inflexibility to that. And so one of the things that we've done at Webster is really kind of try and build some of that flexibility back in. So, for example, the music theory requirements after the first 2 semesters, there's some flex to what they can take. So I have a number of students in I teach a jazz keyboard theory class, and it's a jazz theory class, but it's in a keyboard lab. Okay. So all of the theory they're putting on the piano keyboard.
That's really good.
It's beautiful. Yeah. And so they're learning, shell voicings and how the resolutions are supposed to work. And we're not just doing it on the board. Like, the most of the grade for the class is playing assessments. And so they have to, week to week, they have to be able to, find their way through a chord progression on a tune with good voicing, good voice leading. They have to be able to play the melody and then play voicings in the left hand, which I have, again, music ed students where they did the first 2 semesters, and then they had an option to take, they could take like an analytical techniques class. They could take a 20th century music theory class. They could, so they have options, and they elect to do jazz keyboard theory, which then when those students are in the classroom and they're in the setting you're talking about, and they have a keyboard player who only has a background with classical piano,
Yes.
And here's a chart that only has chord changes. They know what to tell them to play.
That's
They
great.
can give them a starting spot for, okay, cool. So just play the third and the seventh. Here's how those should resolve, And so they have a starting place for that. That for me, I went through a class like that as an undergrad student, and it was completely transformative because all of a sudden I understood, not only understood intellectually what was happening, but I could do it on the keyboard, and it changed the way that I hear on the saxophone. So I feel like that's one of the things that that flexibility that's built into all of our degree programs makes it possible for students to kind of customize and tailor their education to their interests.
I think that's great, and it's really encouraging to hear because and I'm not even talking jazz. When you think about it, there's so much of a pop influence as well. And I think, as things are changing so rapidly, I think that music ed teachers need to be on top of things that are going on culturally too, because that's the things that kids are going home to listen to. And if you want to engage the students and stuff like that,
Right.
just being able to be flexible enough to use the ears more, and do those and engage the students in that way. I think it's great. And I think I know we went off on a total like left turn, but this is no, this is awesome. This is what I talk about. I want my listeners to feel like they're a fly on the wall. I mean it, because this is the kind of
Yeah.
stuff that's so interesting to me. And the thing is that, so like going back to your background and stuff like that, you're out of high school, right? You're going to college, that kind of thing. You wanted to be a performer, right? But it sounds like
Yeah.
you were going around the jazz route, right? Performing in jazz and all that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got it. So so what happened were there any, let me ask you this question. Were there any mentors that you had, whether it was high school or college, that really changed the way you approached the instrument or changed the way you approached improvisation or studying jazz or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, so many folks along the way. As a high school student, I studied with, so I grew up in Hannibal, Missouri, which is famous for being the boyhood home of Mark Twain. And so shout out Hannibal. But I studied with a clarinet professor at a local university that was close thereby. He just passed away recently, Lou Margaglione. And he was an incredible teacher. He really hard-nosed, New York guy. He went to Ithaca College for his degrees, and had been, I guess, an amazing avant-garde clarinetist. Okay. And classical kind of avant-garde clarinetist. And so he ended up in the middle of the country, and I ended up in his studio. And I think that was one of the things that really pushed me to want to pursue music, because as a 8th grade, 9th grade kid, you're trying to figure out what it means to be an adult. And what I found in my ensembles as a high school student, and especially in my lessons with Mr. Margaglione, it was he treated me like an adult in our interactions, meaning there was a responsibility to prepare for the lesson. There was an expectation that I was going to do the work to be prepared, and that I was going to reap the benefits from that. And so that, being treated as an adult with responsibilities and expectations, that kind of made me more hungry for it, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
so I studied with him all through high school, and then towards the tail end of high school, kind of got my first improvisation lessons with a trumpet player, actually. This jazz trumpeter who was based in Quincy, Illinois, Steve Park. And Steve had studied at Indiana University and found his way to Quincy, and just like really great bebop player. And I had no idea what he was playing, but I thought it was so cool. And so, I took lessons with him, but my first jazz improvisation lessons on saxophone took place in my undergrad. And so I studied at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, which is just outside St. Louis, and studied with a saxophonist based here in St. Louis, Jason Swagler. And he's an incredible alto player. I guess I should mention, at that time, I was mostly focused on alto.
Okay.
I made the switch to tenor relatively late. And so I would say, Jason was continues to be a huge influence on my teaching and on my playing. But I was already kind of checking out, pretty heavily checking out Charlie Parker, checking out Cannonball Adderley, checking out contemporary players like I was listening to Joshua Redman, I was listening to Kenny Garrett. So I had found my way in, but I think things really started to take off when I got into that the undergrad program at SIUE. And so Jason was a huge influence. Reggie Thomas, whose name I mentioned earlier, was teaching at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville at the time. And so I worked with him very closely. He's a keyboard player, but I worked with him very closely, both in undergrad and grad school. And, when you use the phrase, those who can't teach, yeah, right? Like that always makes me shudder. But encountering Reggie was like the ultimate panacea to that, because he plays at this impossibly high level and he teaches at the same impossibly high level.
Wow. Cool.
And that was so kind of earth-shattering to me, to realize that he put the same time and thoughtfulness, purposefulness into his teaching that he did into his playing. So that, and that was for me, I think the moment when I realized, like, yeah, I think education could be something that I really want to do. Because I saw the way that he impacted my life with his teaching, but I also saw, the way that he impacted others. And we had so many interactions over the years that I don't know that I've ever expressed to him the ways that, a conversation would come back years later and I would have a, revelation about something. For example, I remember I think I was in grad school at this point. I did my undergrad and grad degree at SIUE, but he asked me if I would go with him to visit, I think it was an elementary school in East St. Louis. And, being a kid who grew up in Northeast Missouri, white kid from Northeast Missouri, like, we had all heard the legends of, East St. Louis. Oh, it's a dangerous place. You shouldn't go, lock your doors, roll up the windows. Don't go through there. And so he asked me if I would be all right with going to this school. And I thought about it for not even half a second. I was like, yeah, absolutely. Because if Reggie was going, I was going to go. Yeah. And so I didn't know that as soon as I got in the car with him, the lesson had started. And so he starts talking to me about, he grew up in East St. Louis, and he's talking about what the population was then and what it was at the time that we were going there, which was about 50% less. And he was talking about how the primary employer within the city was the school district. That's really it. Yeah. And talking about the ways in which the city itself, which is one of the I I should back up and say that it neighbors one of the oldest predominantly black townships in the country, Brooklyn, Illinois. But he talked about the ways in which East St. Louis had been constantly undermined. Basically, folks coming in, prospecting, buying up land, and allowing these buildings to become dilapidated, because they're waiting for the point where things will get so dilapidated that then they can, build something that'll be profitable that's right across the river from the city. So I just remember this incredible experience of going and visiting this place that I never thought I would go, that I had been told to be afraid of as a kid, and we had this beautiful interaction with this room full of first grade, second grade kids. And I think we went out for pancakes afterwards. But I still think about, some of the things that came out of that experience of, going someplace that I probably wouldn't have otherwise been comfortable going, but I got so much out of that experience, and it changed my perception completely of the place that I lived. And also knowing that SIUE serves East St. Louis, that's a part of where he was recruiting students from, and that was a part of the mission of the school, was to understand the folks that were there and to bring them in. And so yeah, he was continues to be a huge influence for me, both as a teacher and also in terms of the things that I value musically.
And life too. I mean, it's,
oh man,
what this is so interesting because, you reminded me, I grew up on Long Island, and people don't realize it's very segregated. Real estate people would not show a family of color houses in certain areas.
Sure.
And, as a young kid growing up, I didn't know anything. And then, I mean, our district that we were in, Sewanega Central School District, had 5 high schools in it, and it was so segregated, and there was a lawsuit against the district because of the segregation. And this is when, I was maybe like in 9th grade or something like that. And yeah, I mean, it's gosh, people don't realize how much that affects kids growing up, seeing that kind of stuff, that negative stuff going on, and I think just the experience you had with this teacher opening your eyes and, having you go through that experience, I think also, it's life changing. It's not just music changing, it's life changing,
Yeah.
and I think to myself, I wish I had something like that, that's awesome,
Yeah, I mean, and so that's why I say, those kind of experiences made me realize how transformative education could be. And so of course you want to do that. Now it's only once you start teaching that you realize how hard it is to pull that off effectively. And so I sometimes joke, with some of my fellow students at SIUE that Reggie set a terrible example for all of us, because he made it look so easy, and realizing the amount of work that goes into being an effective teacher is it's a daunting task. And I mean that when I say it's you have to be every bit as thoughtful in that process of deciding what's the learning sequence going to be. What kind of feedback does this student need to hear right now? How am I going to help them practice transferring the skills they're learning right now to something else? Because ultimately, we work with students for a tiny, tiny window, right? And then ultimately, they're going to go out into the world, or they're going to go out to their gig, and they have to figure it out. And so we've either equipped them with the tools to be able to teach themselves or not.
It's a big responsibility, and the thing it does take a lot of care and thought and time, and and it's tough, and people don't realize that teaching, there's so much more to it. It's not just oh, I'll just zone out or whatever. It really takes so much. It takes as much care as working on a new tune or writing your own tune, and, you know, getting your thoughts across. Now you have this extra responsibility of how can I have these students like relate to this idea, and what can I bring from their life experience to help them to relate to it so that it helps them, it can stick with them, it can transform them. You know,
Right.
it's a big process. And you know, and actually going off the teaching for a second, I know, you know, we've gone through your path and all that kind of thing. You found, you know, that through Reggie, you know, you're like, you know what, education, I think that's for me, right? That's pretty much what happened for you.
Yeah, yeah, I really that was certainly the one of the main kind of drivers for me of wanting to go that route.
And
And it happened pretty early on, really. I would say, you know, really within a year of starting undergrad, it was like, yeah, I think this is what connects for me.
got
Um,
it.
yeah.
Were you like were you gigging around town or anything like that?
You know, I was, and that was a beautiful thing about we're talking about Webster being, you know, here in St. Louis, but SIUE is right across the river, and I distinctly remember in my first semester of my freshman year getting the call to cover for half a gig that Jason Swagler, my teacher, he double booked himself. You know, it was like it's December, he double booked himself, and so he had me cover half a gig, which, you know, I think back to where I was musically at that stage and like, man, he really trusted me a lot.
That's awesome.
but it was such it was a memorable thing, partly because it was December, it was snowing, the gig was on Washington Avenue, which is like kind of a busy entertainment district, and so there, you know, it was so idyllic. It was really amazing. So that was, yeah, I started working, you know, as a gigging musician pretty much my first semester in school at SIUE. And I had done some gigs prior to that, as a high school student, but it definitely felt different, you know, moving to the city, so to speak, and kind of breaking into that scene.
Yeah, and this is going to go into, and the reason why I'm asking this too, because both of this is going to go into your debut album, Space and
Yeah,
Time. And the reason why I'm
sure.
saying this too is because, you know, from the materials that I've read, this album, and I'm wondering how much of an effect, I'm going to make an assumption. I'm wondering how much an effect Reggie had on this album. The reason why
Mm,
the album is inspired. You're a baseball junkie, you know, a
yeah,
self-described
yeah.
baseball junkie. But what really inspired you is reading these baseball books about how these black baseball players were they just denied so many opportunities, and how they, you know, they struggled and did what they did, and how that inspired you. And I'm thinking about your experience that you had in East St. Louis, and I'm thinking that that had a direct tail line to this.
Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about that connection, but I think yeah, there's something to that. You know, St. Louis, you're talking about the segregation in Long Island, and I think a lot of folks, we are sometimes too quick to assume that segregation is relegated to the deep South or something like that,
Yeah.
and it's really not. You know,
No.
it's really not. In St. Louis, our schools were desegregated in the mid '80s.
Okay, my district, we lost a lawsuit. We lost a
Huh?
lawsuit. The school district lost a lawsuit, I should say, and they had to desegregate these schools. And we're
Uh-huh.
talking, you know, Long Island, right? And this was in the
Yeah.
mid 80s also.
Well, so for me, there's a kind of again familial connection to that because my grandfather was a federal judge, and he actually sat. He was the judge on the DSEG case in
Wow.
St. Louis, and like the local paper, which is not the St. Louis Post Dispatch, that different paper. This paper is now defunct, but the Globe Democrat published his home address.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, a lot, you know, I mean, and so he was getting death threats, as they, you know, he's hearing this case, and ultimately he helped force the desegregation of the St. Louis public schools. So, I mean, yeah, it's being in East St. Louis, it's that family history. It's if folks take the time to look around, we still see the trappings of segregation
Oh yeah.
all over, right? I mean, it's everywhere if we just take the time to look around. And so I say that, but also for me, like rewind back to the Baseball 100, this Joe Posnanski ultimately compiled it into a book, but it started as a series of articles that he was publishing. I think he started publishing beginning in like February 2020. Okay. So, which was really great timing because then there was no sports to write about from like March 15th onward. And so I was, I had been gearing up for spring training, like you're getting excited about the baseball season and it's like, oh, there's no baseball. So I started, just really kind of consuming it was like every day he would release a new article about, he's climbing the list of the Baseball 100. And so I grew up in St. Louis, the Cardinals are kind of a big deal here. As I'm sure, the Red Sox are in Boston and the Yankees, Mets, depending on where you grow up. So it's a big deal. And so there are a lot of names I recognize, and not just Cardinals players. Like, if you follow the game, you get to know the names. And some names that I knew but didn't really know the history, folks like Satchel Paige, who had played in the Negro Leagues, but then finished his career like well past what a reasonable aging curve would say. A player should still be productive. He continued playing in the major leagues once that was an open possibility for him. But I got into the top 10 and I started seeing names that I've never heard before. As a lifelong baseball fan, that was like, whoa, what? Like, how did I not know about this guy? And the one that really kind of like drove the point home for me was Josh Gibson, who was a catcher in the Negro Leagues. He was compared with Babe Ruth, and Babe Ruth said, "It's an honor to be compared with him."
Wow.
And that's like, I don't think that Babe Ruth necessarily said that just out of the goodness of his heart, right? Yeah. Like, this is a time when there wasn't a lot of sensitivity to race, to put it, as diplomatically as possible, right? I mean, yeah. Jim Crow, like that was just the accepted norm of the time. And so I've seen these names that I don't recognize. Oscar Charleston, like, what the hell? How do I not know who this guy is? And then, you're reading about their accomplishments and it's like, okay, this is wild. And I'm thinking about that in the context too of the pandemic and going, gee, I had all these plans. Everything was going great. Now it's all totally screwed up. And why did this have to happen to me now? And then then I would read the stuff about Oscar Charleston, read about Josh Gibson and go, okay, wait a minute. Hold on.
Perspective.
I don't have anything to bitch about.
Yeah.
Like, this is, like, these folks dealt with this. And it also made me think about that we don't have control over the window that we get, either the length of the window or, when it takes place.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the place I was at when I was beginning to write some of the music. I'm a really, really slow composer, so I have to kind of live with, once I decide, okay, there's a tune here, I have to kind of live with it for a while to figure out what the structure is. But the seeds of the record kind of came into existence in late 2020, 21. And then, it was fully formed by 22. So.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So what, okay, if you can be specific in terms of what was it about like the Baseball 100 or these other books or this experience that really inspired you to write this music?
Well, yeah. And I should say also like that it's not like the whole album is not tied into that concept. It's really the tune Space and Time was built around that singular idea. But sorry, repeat the question.
Yeah, so I was thinking that the whole album was inspired by, reading these articles and reading these books and
Yeah, not the whole album. Really that tune was kind of inspired by that. But other things kind of draw on. I guess there's some things that are more tangentially related to that. For All We Know is one of the tunes on the album that is dealing with, for me, I guess some similar themes about the time in which we live and the people that we interact with, which, when I was thinking about space and time, that's really what I was thinking about. It's like, not having control over the time in which we live, but having to make the best of what we have. And so the album actually ends also with, an arrangement of the standard For All We Know. And that arrangement kind of came about in another moment of grappling with life and death and mortality and all that stuff. A dear friend of mine who I went to school with at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, died by suicide. And
wow.
I found out about it at work. I was teaching at another institution at the time. And I remember like shutting my office door and just like sitting down at the piano, and I'm like sobbing. I'm trying to figure out what to do in this moment. And so for whatever reason, that tune came to me, and it was like, okay, but this harmony doesn't fit what I'm feeling in this moment. And so I really kind of reconstructed it to fit both what the lyric says. I guess I've become a lyric guy. I know there are those players that say you should know the lyrics to every standard that you play, and I've never been that way. But with something like, if I'm writing an arrangement or writing, in this case a reharmonization, I was really trying to think about what chord, what sound goes with this moment in the lyric. And the lyric to that tune, I won't quote the whole thing, but For All We Know, it ends with, tomorrow was made for some, tomorrow may never come, for all we know.
Mm.
So that's kind of where that one came from, where the arrangement started out anyway. And then my mom passed in 2022, and it kind of took on a different meaning, related but different. You deal with we're in a temporary state of existence, and the people that we love are in a temporary state of existence too. And so yeah, that tune is kind of special because that's where that was coming from.
Yeah, wow. And that's really powerful too when you think about it. And the interesting thing is that, in some ways we've gotten very like heavy, with
Yeah.
some of the things we're thinking about, but that's what brings out artistry. That's what brings out musicianship and people creating art in all types of ways and stuff like that. And I think that's really great. And the interesting thing, so this is your debut album. So let's talk about that for a second, because, some people will have debut albums, much younger, whatever the case may be. But,
Right.
I'm thinking that, being so involved with teaching and all that kind of stuff, and people don't realize how much time, that takes, when you're really teaching that kind of thing. I'm thinking that you just didn't have the time until now.
Yeah. It's funny because we make time for the things that are important.
That's true.
In the end, we make time for the things that are important, but also I think, I don't know if this is true for everybody, but for me, I felt like, in some ways being in school is always reminding you of the things that you can't do. you know? And so it's like, oh, well, I'll master this and then I'll be ready to do the thing, you know, or I'll get this together and then I'll do the thing. And, but again, space and time, right? For all we don't know how much time there is. So we better do the thing. And that's ultimately where I came down. It's like, when to anybody out there listening and you're thinking about making a record, just do the thing. Like, don't wait, because ultimately it's a document of where you are in the moment. And, you know, you keep practicing, we keep studying, and you'll be somewhere else, you know, a year from now, or 18 months from now, or 5 years from now. And the goal is it's not a linear path. But the goal is to continue improving our musicianship and our artistry, and bring joy and that humanity to the instrument and to the music. And that's a timeless thing, you know. So if we're doing that, like, yeah, keep working on your intonation, keep doing your long tones. Those are really important. Keep working your scales, but like focus on the other parts too, because I think that's the magic. That's where we really captivate people, the listeners I'm talking about, whether they're saxophonists or just pedestrians, you know, folks that walk in off the street knowing nothing about music. I want to be able to connect with those folks too.
Yeah, and you know what? This is also getting into another thing too. When you think about it, a lot of people have taken up an instrument later on, and especially the pandemic has inspired this too. You know,
Sure.
people are like, you know what? Space and time, right? You know, for all we know. These are great themes, actually. So they took up an instrument later in life, always felt like they wanted to improvise, that kind of thing. And what you just said, there's always this feeling like I've got to wait until I do this, wait until I do this, wait until I do this. But, you know, if you just keep going on your path and just keep taking action, as
Yeah.
opposed to thinking, just keep taking action, get guidance or whatever, and then, you know, you can start doing what you want to do. You know, when I taught, you know, again, elementary school and all that kind of thing, I would have kids improvise right away, like, you know, after they learned a couple of notes, like on the recorder, you know, and then on
Yeah.
their instruments and stuff like that. Because improvisation is essentially using what you know of whatever language you're going to use, right? And just using it and creating rhythms and doing all that kind of thing. And it's really inspiring the way you're saying this and stuff. I find it really inspirational,
Yeah.
and just you know, just the thought process behind that, and that powerful lyric from For All We Know. It really makes you think, you know, and it makes you think, you know what, I gotta stop just sitting around, you know, and you know, yeah, we're here for a certain amount of time. That's it, you know.
Yeah.
And what do you want to
And
do with your time?
you know, you mentioned folks that are adult students that are starting an instrument. So my mom passed away, and she was an amateur singer and piano player. She had a piano at home, and she started performing publicly very late. Like, she was 60,
Awesome.
and
Good.
at a certain point, she asked me, like, well, because at this point I was gigging, you know, and she's like, do you think that should I get more together before I start to gig? You know, and it's like, Mom, if you wait, you're going to be a year older. And so she went out and did the thing. You know, she went out and got the gig. Now she's passed. There's a piano at home. And my dad's like, what am I going to do with this? He decided to take piano lessons. He's never, I mean, I think maybe he played piano, you know, like I did at 5 or 6, but never really studied, earnestly. And we keep having this conversation about, well, you know, he's working on this or that. And he says, you know, if I work at this, I think I'll be able to really have fun with it. And I said, no, stop. You need to have fun now. Remember to have fun at the stage that you're at, because I think that, the joy in music, like, it should start at the beginning and it should continue the whole time that we play, you know. If we're not making music and having fun and experiencing joy while we do it, we become bitter musicians, you know, and nobody wants to hear that.
Yeah, and I love the way you're saying this too, because here's the thing. Yeah, if you're not enjoying the journey, why on earth could you possibly believe that number one, the journey never ends?
There's
Okay,
no
have you
destination, right?
yeah.
The journey is the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. The journey is the whole thing. And I get that's the hardest thing for people to get. And I know because for me, various things that I've done in my life, and it's like, no, come on, I just want to get there already. But the thing is, if you realize that if you have that kind of attitude of impatience and stuff like that, you've just spent all that time being impatient and not enjoying yourself and
Right.
missing out because when you're enjoying what you're doing, you're more receptive to
Absolutely.
learning more and doing more things with it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that perspective to that. Hey, maybe that's the next album.
Perhaps. Yeah.
Yeah, let me ask you this question too. I mean, there's been so many things, I'm taking notes while we're doing this. So many great things that you've been saying and inspirational things. I'm curious if you have any tips for, I would say like maybe, whether for improvisers, people that are maybe having the same thought process where, all right, I just have to make sure I can do this X, Y, and Z before I go out and go to a jam session or go out and join a band. Like any tips, other than what we kind of spoke about?
Um, it's it's there's so many different directions we could go because that's an important question and it's a broad question too. I mean, I think that um, for me, a lot of it always connects back to listening, and whether I'm trying to work on sound or work on developing vocabulary or work on writing. If I'm composing, it starts with really like finding a model for that. I remember I mentioned I made this switch from alto to tenor pretty late, like kind of midway through my grad degree. I thought maybe I'm a tenor player, and I distinctly remember, okay, I'm going to try and figure out a sound on tenor. What am I going to do? Who do I know that has a Dexter Gordon? It was so like immediately I went to Dexter Gordon Go, and so because I knew somehow I knew that I needed to have a really strong concept for what that sound was going to be,
Okay.
in order to create it. And that's one of the things that sometimes drives me crazy about the way that we teach embouchure or teach sound. It's like, well, practice long tones or make your embouchure round and these are important discussions to have. But if that student doesn't have a clear image in their mind of the sound they're trying to create, they don't know when they've gotten there. And and I think the same thing is true for, man, I think about the way that we play melodies, and whether they're improvised melodies or if we're playing a melody that's something out of a real book, right? Like a standard. If we're playing a standard, a lot of times we throw out, folks will throw out kind of generic, well, play it like you're a singer. What the hell does that mean?
Right, because singers, so many different singers, and you compare Frank
Right.
Sinatra to like Nat King Cole. I mean, it's different.
Right. Yeah, and that's we can get even like further afield if you think about like Shirley Horn or Billie Holiday and the way that they phrase and move the phrase within like to where it goes across the bar line or where it starts in kind of an unconventional place relative to where we would see that melody written on the page. So for me, I feel like I'm coming from an authentic place if I'm first connecting with the greats, whether that's dealing with sound, whether that's dealing with vocabulary. Like, man, I've got a bunch of students right now that are dealing with we're borrowing vocabulary from Clifford Brown from his solo on Pent Up House, which is just chock full of incredible bebop vocabulary, right? And there, of course, could we pull 2 5 licks from a book? yeah, that's really easy. But I want them to be equipped with the tools to hear something on a record and go, oh man, I love that. Let me find out what that is, you
Yes.
know?
By ear.
And yeah, by ear. Yeah, by ear. Because I think that's the real magic of this music. And if we're not, as musicians, taking the time to check something out orally, then how do we expect our audiences to do that? You know?
Yeah.
It's like my wife is a writer, and she's reading all the time, poetry, fiction, all kinds of stuff. And when she was in school, she would be in these writing workshops with folks, and I don't think they were reading. It's like, if you can't bother yourself to read poetry, what makes anybody think that folks are going to want to read what you've written? And I think if we hold ourselves to the same standard, it's just a matter of listening to and connecting with the thing that we want to do. Whether that's, if you want to play like Boots Randolph, man, listen to as much of that as possible and figure out what makes that tick. But the other thing is, like, man, go for it. I just had an opportunity to hear a workshop with the alto saxophonist Christopher McBride.
Okay.
And he'd be a great interview if you haven't had a chance to talk with him. He's based in New York. He's done some stuff with like Marquise Hill, the great trumpet player. Okay. But he said something along the line, I'm going to paraphrase here, but he said something along the lines of, if you want to do something well, you have to be willing to be bad at it first.
That's awesome.
And man, when he said that, it hit me like a ton of bricks, because I thought, yeah, that's really what it's at, where it's at. Like, if you want to change something about your playing, or if you want to introduce something new, man, you got to commit to that, and sometimes that means sounding bad. And sometimes that's hard because, we have an ego that needs to be fed. And we need to tell ourselves that we're good, and we need to, convince the people around us that we're good. But there are more dividends, I think, long-term paid in taking those risks and being willing to sound bad part of the time,
Totally agree with that. And what's so interesting when you say that, this is also a generational thing, because the kids that are growing up today, it's okay for them to make mistakes. But, me growing up in the 80s and stuff like that, it wasn't. And then my parents certainly wasn't. You get smacked across the face,
In some ways, I agree with that, but I'll push back on that in the sense that I think a lot of what they see on social media is super, super polished, and it's like posted in a way that it looks like, oh, I'm just casually sitting here playing my saxophone, ripping on Cherokee at 350 beats per minute. Yeah. And the reality is that person spent thousands of hours and thousands of dollars putting together, great microphone setup and great looking video and being in a setting that looks cool, and, maybe tens or hundreds of takes to get the exact look and presentation. And I think that sometimes that is intimidating.
Yes.
Or they see somebody being bad at something online, and then it's like, well, I don't want to do that. So I'm afraid of trying this thing that might make me look bad, because I don't want to be like that person that got made fun of for being bad at something online.
Yeah, you know what? Thank you for bringing that up. That is true. I'm thinking, I wasn't even thinking social media. I was thinking in the schools where,
Sure.
It's, they're encouraging kids to make more mistakes, and that you hear people saying fail fast so you can move forward. But you're absolutely right with social media, because that's the other side of the stick that we didn't have growing up, where that can really just set you back so far, because of perception, and I'm not even talking about just life in general, but exactly what you just talked about. Let's say you're this kid in the middle of the country, you love jazz, and you're doing pretty well at it, and then you see these kids that are around your age, and they're ripping through Cherokee at 300, and
Right.
and you're like, oh my God, I can't compete with that. I guess I can't do this. And
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awful. You're right. That's totally awful. That's good catch on that one for sure. And how do we, that's the whole thing. And you have to rely on your teachers, your community, all that kind of thing. And just to, you know, keep going, like we said before, and inspire kids to, as you said, Christopher McBride said, you have to be willing to just be awful at it for a while.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, it's
It's
okay.
awesome.
It's okay. And I think that that's something that is maybe a positive change for like the generation of I think teachers that are coming up now. Um, I definitely know there was an era when like teachers always needed to be right about everything all
Yeah.
the time,
Yeah.
and I with my students try to be very candid, and yeah, I'm willing to accept that I may have learned that melody wrong. Let's go back to the record and check that out. I was just working with a student on this today. So he's learning the melody for Darn That Dream. And I stopped and I said, I think we need to check that out. He's like, no. He's 100% convinced. No, that's how Nat King Cole sings it. Like that's 100%. I was like, okay, cool. Hey, I'm glad you checked it out. Let's go back and listen. And it's like I'm willing to be wrong.
Yeah.
But let's do the work. Let's do the legwork to figure out what the right way, or a right way to do the thing. And so I hope that what my students take away from that is that none of us are infallible, and that a part of this learning to play this music is that we have to be patient with ourselves sometimes, and go back and maybe do the legwork again, to shore up deficiencies. Or if we're trying to move things forward, like, man, there are some times when my students hear me trying things and like, oh, that didn't work. But I'm not going to be stagnant. I'm not going to do the same thing because it works. And like,
Yeah.
I would rather be growing as a musician, because I think it makes me a better player, but also I think it makes me a better teacher. If I've forgotten what it's like to learn and to be bad at something, right? How can I expect them to be vulnerable in front of me?
That's
So
pretty powerful. That's so true. That is so
yeah,
true.
yeah,
That is that and just thinking about that too, seeing your teacher working through something and realizing, oh wow, they're not perfect. And that's really huge, you know?
yeah.
And seeing how you do it and how you work through things is really huge, you know?
Well, what I hope that they get is a window into the process. Like in this example with a student today, it was like, yeah, he saw 100%. We went through 10 examples of the bridge on Darn That Dream. It's like, okay, Nat does it this way, Dexter does it this way, Billie Holiday does it this way, and by the end, he's like, oh yeah, okay, you were right, you know. but I wanted him to see. I wasn't gonna just say, no, you're wrong. You don't know what you're talking about. Like, you need to listen to me. I'm the teacher. No, Nat King Cole is the teacher. Dexter Gordon is the teacher. Billie Holiday, like those are the folks who lived this music. So let's see what they have to say about it. Let's check out 10 examples of this bridge and like really figure out what makes this work. So that's through that process, he came away from that going, oh yeah, I need to listen to more examples of this so I really know what's going on. It's like, yeah, cool.
And see, and listen, that's great advice, and just like, I asked about tips and stuff. You gave such great advice right here, and not realizing it too, I think, in terms of, how you're approaching things, but also in the statement about vulnerability, and it's okay, for your teacher to like make mistakes, but also to work through things, because you sharing your process it's gonna inspire somebody else to be like, oh, okay, I see what he's doing. Let me try that. I think that's awesome.
Hmm.
I think that's inspiring. And yeah, and listen, I wanted, thank you for your time, but I've got to ask you too, though, what are like some future projects that you have? Are you planning on, if you're able to, are you planning on touring with the new album or doing some shows around town? Like, what are you thinking of doing?
Yeah, so I'm working on putting some things together regionally here with connections in Kansas City, Chicago, Memphis, St. Louis, so kind of regionally in the Midwest. And then also I lived 9 years in Austin, Texas, and so really great musicians and great community in Central Texas, and looking forward to some opportunities to get down there and present some of this music for those folks as well. And we'll see what else I can put together with this tour. But it's been a really fun process. I feel like at various stages along the way, when you self-produce a record, the learning curve can be steep, and so yeah, in some ways I embody that Christopher McBride, be bad at it so you can be good at it later. But I'm looking forward to that, and I also, there's a really vibrant scene here in St. Louis. I am lucky to have the opportunity to play with this great bass player, Bob DeBoo, here in town. He's preparing to record a project this winter, which then we'll be releasing sometime after that. So, it's an exciting time to be a jazz musician in St. Louis, middle of the country. There's a lot of stuff going on here. It's a great place to be.
Yeah, and again, thank you for reminding me about Jazz St. Louis, because that again, it's such a great organization, and I've heard it from a few guests in the past too, and it's a great reminder, for sure. But again, I'm so happy for your success. Where can people find you online and also the album online?
Yeah, so my website is bennettwoodmusic.com. That's two E's, two N's, two T's. That's the most confusing way to say that. BENNETTWOOD music.com. And you can find info about me. You can find, some live performances that I did over the years. And you can also find links to the record. So it's on all major streaming platforms. I think there are direct links there for Apple Music and for Spotify. If you want to get a physical copy, if you're one of those folks who still has a CD player, I do have CDs. So I still need to get my website store together, but yes, I will be shipping CDs to folks that want to get a physical copy as well. But your best bet right now is streaming. So,
do you have a way on your website right now for people to email you if they want to?
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Okay, yeah. I'm going to write that down.
And it's fine to reach out via email as well. To Bennett Wood. I'm easy to find. BennettWoodMusic@gmail. Yeah.
Oh, that's okay. That's cool. That's easy. We'll put that link. We'll put the link definitely for the website, and also your socials as well too. Like I guess you're on Facebook and Instagram.
I am. I'm again. I figured one handle was easy, so Bennett Wood Music @Bennett Wood Music on Instagram, and I'm on Facebook too. So
cool.
Look for a guy holding a saxophone.
Well, listen, Bennett, this was awesome. I had such a great time, and you shared some great insight, great tips. Thank you so much for that.
Oh man, it was such a privilege to be on the show, Donna. So I really want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me. And man, I love your podcast, love what you're doing, and really appreciate the opportunity to share some time with you.
Thank you.